So I got a comment on my Merlin video where I was talking about how he's still really good and kind of comparing him to Proto Merlin and why they really don't invalidate each other, getting more into the actual use cases for the servants and why she seems to power creep him but doesn't really power creep him. And one of the comments I got was, well, can you compare Merlin to Yui? And I realized I haven't updated my support tier list over here, so I decided I would go ahead and do that. And this year, I've actually gone through and I've gotten a lot more of them on the tier list because, you know, the last couple of years, people were like, where's this servant? Where's that servant? I decided to start including more and more of them to make sure I'm getting all of the main supports that people would be thinking of. Now, there still are some servants like, say, Himiko, Summer BB that you probably could classify as supports, but I didn't slide them in on this list. You guys can let me know in the comments if they would more fit for this tier list. I didn't think they would. Then there's also people like, say, the Trom 3-star caster we're going to be getting, who kind of gives some supports on his first and second skill, but doesn't really seem to be an actual support, or someone like Mary Anning, who also gives a couple of support buffs, but I'm not sure if I would qualify her as a support, so y'all can let me know some other people that I might have missed. Now, I do have, kind of specific tiers here. We have obviously the meta tier list, where these are the guys that kind of are just bar none the best units in the game. You can't really compete with them because they are just so tippy top meta. You gotta have these servants that it's not really worth putting them in a normal tier list. And then I have this for one specific servant who I'm going to get to later on, but other than that, it falls between S to D tier. But I'm going to spoil something. I'm not putting anybody in D tier because I really don't think any of these servants are actual D tier gutter trash. I think even the low ranking C tier supports still have a decent average. And again, I kind of go more off of an American grading standard where, you know, if you get a C, that's like a 70%, you get a B, that's like an 80 to 90%, an A is a, 90 to 99%, and then an S is like you got 100 on your grade. So if you kind of think of it like that, the C tier supports aren't people that I think are bad. I think they still pass in some capacity, and if your box is a little bit more limited or you're really, really new, you could probably get some type of use out of it. It's just as we move up, they start getting more bells and whistles, and they start getting a bit more, I guess, generic, so you can kind of bring them to any team comp. That makes them a lot more accessible. But let's start off with the actual meta servants, and these ones are very obvious. There's, Castoria, who I believe is the best unit in the game, bar none, absolutely insane. Koyenskaya doesn't really need anything to have to add on her. You have Oberon, and then finally you have Ruler Scotty, and then Caster Scotty. Now, these two, I know some people are going to comment down and say, well, they're quick support, so therefore they're bad, but quick is still a viable thing you can do. It's not the best thing you can do, but I don't think everyone who plays the game really understands what is good versus what is viable, where, something is good is saying, well, Arts and Buster might be the best things that you should be doing, and they're the most viable, but that's not like if you have Ruler Scotty and Caster Scotty that you can't use them. You can still use them to clear most content, whether it comes to boss fights. I know they're not as good as, say, Castoria, most certainly not, or even what you could do with Koyenskaya and looping your skills to really effectively take down bosses either really quickly or, sustain yourself over time. But they can still do that to a similar capacity with the quick units, right? And it's still very good to do. It is completely viable. It's not like it's a niche thing that you only do every now and then. If you want to bring your MHX altar instead of bringing, say Summer Anastasia as your boss killer, I don't know why I picked that one, but let's say you want to bring her instead, that's still completely viable. You can still bring your quick DPSs. Someone like Tyra is still really gonna perform very well with Ruler and Caster Scotty over here. So I don't really think it's worth to say, well, they're not meta good supports, because I think that's also very bad for newer players who might like Scotty. Maybe they like the gameplay of Quick and they're like, it's not meta. No, it's the worst of the three metas, but it is still good. It's completely viable. So I just kind of wanted to get that out right at the very beginning here. Now, what we're going to do is we're actually going to move backwards. We're going to start at the very bottom and then start slowly moving our ways up. And I did take notes for myself to make sure that I got all this right and we could kind of move in a more orderly fashion. So starting off with C tier, these are not in any particular order. We're starting off with Nobukatsu. Now, Nobukatsu is always thought of as the Nobunaga support, but surprisingly, he does do a few things that I think keep him out of being in D tier. For one, he does hit the enemy with a confusion status, which is technically a skill seal if you want to view it as that, as well as a 30% Buster resist down. So if you're bringing him along Buster Servants, he is providing some decent damage to them. He does give the party 20% crit damage for 3 turns and does gen 15 stars per turn. He also does have a taunt on himself that does give the entire party a 3k heal when defeated, so that can also buy you a turn. And if you combo that with his NP, which does take himself out, you can kind of choose when you get that heal. And then he also again gives the party 20% NP and 10% Buster on his own NP. Obviously though, if you do bring a Nobu ally, that being Mao Nobu, Archer Nobu, Summer Nobu, whoever, you know, whatever Nobu that you bring or whatever they decide to put out, Santa Nobu maybe next year, they get an additional 80% crit damage and 20% Buster. But he is still kind of a decent little guy you can bring who doesn't cost a whole lot. He's very cheap as a bronze servant, so if you just need to slide someone on in the team, he can maybe make the cut in some capacity. Following up on him is going to be Shakespeare. Shakespeare doesn't do a lot, but the little bit that he does might find some use. You know, if you don't have anyone better, he does still give a party-wide 40% Buster buff, albeit for 1 turn, and then he does give an ally 20% NP and 100% Star Gen for 1 turn, which 100% Star Gen is not bad. You know, that's still the cast skill Star Gen buff, just only for 1 person for 1 turn. He does have a self 1 turn invincibility with a small 1500 heal, so he can maybe keep himself around if you want to slap him with Gouda Gouda Poster Girl, I suppose. Some taunt CE to extend his lifespan a little bit, but if we made this targetable, he'd probably be received a little bit better. And then his NP is AoE with a 40% chance to stun, so it's a little bit, it's like a fourth of what Waver's NP can do, but it's still not completely useless, I suppose. He does a little bit for your guys, you know, he's like a decent little cheap plug suit option, I suppose, or someone you can throw in the back line. You know, at the very end of the fight, maybe your Merlin goes down and you got to bring this guy in. Maybe that 20% NP and that 40% Buster does pop off for your extra turn and you're able to finish the fight for it. Or maybe he does stun the entire enemy party and it just buys you a free turn. I mean, he's got some stuff there. But then following him is Mozart. Now, Mozart, I think, has more of a claim to being a higher tier, C tier unit because he actually does have a niche in the fact that he gives the entire party a 44% arts buff for 1 turn. He bombs 50 stars, which is only on a 6-turn cooldown, which I note because something like that you would think would be on a 10-turn cooldown, especially for a year 1 servant. You would think they would have made this really hard to get back, but surprisingly, especially with Tamamo being an arts unit that can lower your skill cooldown, it's only on 6 turns, so you might be able to do it again if he sticks around long enough. He does lower the enemy's NP damage by 18% for 1 turn, not super important, but what is nice is that on top of giving the arts buff, he does reduce the enemy's arts resistance by 20% for 3 turns, so he's kind of double buffing your arts units if you want to think of it that way, while also reducing their crit chance by 20% for 3 turns, so he can kind of prevent you from getting crit, which can be nice deeper into the fight as the bosses maybe start giving themselves buffs, assuming he's still around. And then his NP's also kind of nice because it has an 80% chance to lower all enemies' attack and defense by 20% for 3 turns, kind of making you a little bit more bulky and giving you, again, extra damage. You know, he surprisingly gives you more than you would expect for a bronze servant. And I think if they did go in and fix his NP, first of all, let's remove that 80% chance. Let's just make it guaranteed, because let's not even play with a 4 in 5 chance, because we all know you're always going to miss and get the 1 in 5 chance of getting nothing. But if we remove that, it could be kind of nice. And the fact that his NP does give curse, let's say maybe they also had his NP give the entire party a curse power mod, very similar to the CE that just came out that, you know, gives you 50% battery and then the curse power mod as well. You could do something like that for Mozart, and that might actually make him a bit more of a niche servant. I could definitely see him in 1 or 2 buffs being a very solid, low-cost, B-tierish support. Then moving on, we have Irisfield down here. Now, Irisfield is very unfortunate because they did give her a very solid buff. And remember, this is not in any particular order. It's just the order that I wrote them down and as I was kind of reviewing where I would put everybody. But she's a little bit unfortunate because they gave her a very strong first skill buff. For one, she increases her healing rate by 100%. So those 2 3k heals that she has on her skill 3 and her NP are actually 6k heals because they're getting buffed by 100%. That's really insane. 6k 3k heals are not nothing. And then they gave her a 50% battery, so it's way easier to get into her own NP, and she gives the party, except herself, a 30% NP damage buff for 3 turns, which is very nice as kind of just a little bit of a damage steroid. The unfortunate thing is that I still think she needs work on, say, her skill 2. Maybe we make that targetable, because right now it's a self 1-turn invincibility buff that also gives herself 30% NP gain for 3 turns. If we make that targetable, she could actually start to evolve into a very strong defensive type, support type servant, because her NP gives the entire party a 3k guts, which is really nice. You know, there's not a lot of servants that do that. I mean, there's her, and then there's Scheherazade, and there's not a lot of other ones that are coming to my mind right now, so she's kind of the poster child for doing that, but unfortunately, she just is lacking other buffs right now. You know, are you going to bring a extra 4-star servant, which has a higher team cost, when you might be able to get some other value in some of the B tier servants that have a couple of 3 stars, or even the A tier that also has a couple of 3 stars that might be a bit more team cost friendly for you to be able to bring, and might also bring a lot more value to the party. So she's a little unfortunate because she's not quite there yet, but I do think she will get there. And then finally, the last servant, spoiler alert, that's going to be up here in the C tier is going to be Santa Altera. Now, Santa Altera, I think, is better than some people give her credit for, because her buffs are decent. She's just a bit dated, because she does give one ally a 20% battery and 30% star gen for 3 turns. That's decent, you know, not a bad battery. And the star gen, could it be higher? Probably, but it's still a nice bonus effect. She also does give the ally a 30% NP damage buff and 30% crit damage, but those are only for 1 turn. And that's kind of what I mean that she's a little bit dated, because you would want that to be, say, a 3-turn buff instead of it just being, okay, you get 1 decent turn with that 30% NP damage. The 30% crit is, again, kind of nice, but it's not all that massive. You know, if you already have crit damage going, you could just add it on there. So you already have 100% crit damage. Well, nice, you got 130%. You might get some nicer numbers, but 1 turn is a bit dated. You know, we're not in year 2 anymore where that's all that considerably great. I mean, you need to have something like Merlin or Proto Merlin's 100% crit buff for 1 turn to kind of have it be a bit excusable. But then you have her 3rd skill, which is pretty much just an offensive skill that gives her Pierce Invul, a decent 30% defensive buff, and a decent enough star weight. But you don't really want your support to be trying to hog all the stars and everything, especially when her NP does splash 20 stars. So you would think that she could kind of bomb stars and let people use them, but with her own star weight, she's probably going to steal them, and then she's also probably going to stun herself after the 3 turns are over. So yeah, we probably need to either fix up her NP a little bit, or maybe fix up her 3rd skill, which I don't know why they haven't. They did buff Bibi, who is the other rare Mana Prism free-to-play unit. They gave her a buff, but they didn't give anything to Santa Altera, even though she desperately needs it a lot more. But again, lands in C tier because I don't think she's completely useless, and she is a free NP5 servant, so she could be kind of a pseudo support that could give you decent damage, I suppose, but really nothing else exceptional outside of that. Now, moving in to the B tier. First and foremost, we have the boy Chen Gong. Chen Gong is very good for a myriad of different reasons. I know that, for one, people would be like, oh, well, definitely we could talk about him being able to do the Chen Gong farming, but that's not really something I'm considering for him being a support. I still think he lands in B tier off his own merits of, one, being able to put a taunt on anybody. That's very useful. So you have someone like a Castoria put her 3rd skill on your DPS. You could also buy a free turn by putting the taunt on that person, and again, buy yourself a free turn. It's just very useful. Also, lowering their critical attack damage by 30% for 3 turns is just useful as well. Not getting crit can potentially save your run. She has a slightly weaker version of Waver's defense skill. You know, instead of 30% defense, it's 24%. That might kind of mess up some defensive comps if you're still into that sort of thing, but he still gives you the damage cut and still gives you the 10% NP for the entire party, which is kind of nice. And then he essentially has hero creation, but only for berserkers, because you still get the buster buff. That's still the same. It's a 50% mana burst for free. That's always going to be good. But then only berserkers get the big crit damage, and they only get the max HP buff, which isn't too terribly bad. There's a lot of really good berserker DPSs. I talked about MHX Altar earlier. Obviously, this is meant for the lore reason of using it with Lu Bu, but literally you could use any berserker. You could use Summer Jalter, for instance. You could bring Zhang Yu if you know Lu Bu's not to your taste. You could bring whoever you want. You could bring Summer Ibuki, and it's pretty decent for that, you know, if you are going to be bringing him. But what I really think makes Chen Gong really good is his ability to cycle out buffers. Now, usually you use that for himself if you're going to be doing farming with him, as he does have an arts AoE NP. But let's say you want to forcibly cycle out different buffers for some kind of niche for whatever the challenge quest is demanding of you. You could have Chen Gong in slot 3, your DPS in slot 2, and then the different buffers that you want to kind of cycle out in slot 1. And so every time he fires his NP, you'd be like, well, Castoria, thank you for your service. You're out. Bring in Merlin. Okay, Merlin, dump some buffs. Thank you for your service. Kick him out. Scotty, welcome in. You know, thank you for helping us out. You know, you could kind of do that, or get creative with other servants, like say Santa Nightingale, or, you know, maybe you need an Asclepius if you're trying to time a min turning thing. He could be very interesting in cycling out buffers. Obviously, though, you're predominantly going to use that for farming, but I did want to bring up that it is something that he can do that's pretty good if you want to bring him as a buffer himself. Now we have Hans. Now, Hans, I do think I was a little harsh to the last time I did one of these, because the last time I did one of these videos, I was, you know, not really giving him as much credit as I think he deserves, but using him a little bit more on, say, the free-to-play FGO account that I started, using him in a couple of the more recent CQs that we've gotten on JP, he can be kind of nice as a supplementary support. I don't think he's quite good enough to hard carry in the position of, say, someone like a Merlin or a Proto Merlin, but he can be really good. I mean, the fact that he gives the entire party 50% crit damage for 3 turns is really funny, because it means that you could actually do stuff like DPS Castoria or DPS Merlin on top of already buffing your own DPS servant, who is probably going to have their own crit damage buffs. But then, while I was really harsh on the buff that they gave him, I've started to like it a little bit more, because it just requires you to go after the different alignments for your servant. Because if you're a good attribute servant, you get 50% star gen, you get 20% NP gain if you're balanced, 20% NP damage if you're evil, and then everybody else gets 20% crit damage. And it almost forces you to kind of engage with the lore and personality of the servant, and consider how good he's going to be and what areas of their kit he's going to be plugging up, which I think is kind of nice. And they're just all free buffs anyway. You know, while in some scenarios I want the extra NP gain, or I want the extra NP damage, or I'd rather him give all of these buffs to everybody, that it might have been a little too insane for what Lisango considers to be more of a free-to-play 2-star low rarity servant. So I kind of get that. And he still does have the 75% battery to help him get into his NP, which is just kind of a nice balanced NP. Unfortunately, still does have the 80% chance, but you know, the buffs are really good, so I can understand maybe why they kept that in there. But it's an 80% chance to give the entire party 20% attack, 20% defense, 20% star gen for 3 turns, and a 1k heal every single turn for 3 turns. And those are all different separate procs. So you can get the attack, star gen, and heal, or all of them, or potentially none of them if you're really unlucky. And I did like the buff that they gave to his 3rd skill, or when they gave him a 3rd skill. The fact that he can give an ally 15 stars and 10% NP every single turn for 3 turns, and you don't have to give that to your DPS. You could give that to, say, your Merlin, your Castoria, your Koyanskaya, whoever you bring, because maybe, you know, Hans is at really low HP as he is a low rarity servant. You could pass that off to them, and then they're getting their NP more frequently, and they're still providing the stars, because the star generation buff goes to everybody. So that can be very nice. You know, I do like the utility you can use with Hans, and the more that I've played with him, the more that I've liked him. Next, moving into Mash. I think Mash gets a little bit of bonus points because technically she's 2 different units in one, because she's either a defense support with the ability to give 20% NP and invincibility to an ally, a 1-turn taunt on herself, and her NP gives you a fat 30% attack buff for 3 turns, and the total defense between skill 1 and her NP is 50% with some extra damage cut, so she's a nice little defensive support. Or she's a double taunter, so she can buy you 2 free turns, because 1 taunt has the invincibility on it, so that's a free turn just entirely, and then the other one is just a normal taunt, so she's probably going to exit stage right after that turn ends, you know, ideally in at least the setups I use her in, like I did for my Anastasia clear, to kind of get rid of all of Anastasia's on-attack stun debuffs. But then her NP, thankfully they did fix to kind of put it more in line with the old Mash, because it did just give pretty much the same damage cut, except it was hit-based for longer turns instead of just 3 free turns, and it still gave the defense, but it didn't have the attack. They've now, as of Lost Belt 7, given her the attack back, although it's only 20%, but nice that she at least has it there. And then she does have the ability to do a decently powerful Buster crit with the Black Barrel skill. It also does just pierce defense, which is kind of nice. So, you can either get a double taunter, which is super useful, or you can just get a nice defensive support if you kind of want to just face tank things through different challenge quests. And again, 50% from just skill 1 and the NP alone is kind of crazy. Next, we have Paracelsus. Now, Paracelsus is kind of interesting because I used this guy a lot when I was going through the Scotty meta because I did not have my own Scotty, and so essentially I had to masquerade as having my own with Paracelsus and Waver kind of pretending to be the other Scotty. And this guy can be kind of nice if you're in one of those more limited scenarios because he does have an 80% battery for his AoE NP, and that can clear some really weak wave 1s or some weak trash mobs if you're bringing him to a challenge quest. And that can actually be very nice as a support because maybe your looper's not as good, especially if you're having to use someone like Paracelsus. Your box probably isn't more fully built up, and that can be useful, especially if it's like an assassin or berserker node, because going in neutral, you do not want this guy to try to be taking down like neutral sabers or something because his damage is really bad. But he does also give the entire party a 20% arts buff for 3 turns, and most importantly gives a fat 50% NP gain buff for 3 turns to one ally. And the reason you might maybe bring him to a challenge quest is that he also gives them a 3k guts. Not bad. So you can bring him with your quick units because that 50% NP gain really does help them out a lot. Or you could really make full use of him and bring him with an arts unit because then they're getting just that little bit of that extra arts buff that's going to give them a little bit of extra damage and slightly more NP gain on their arts cards. And again, hey, a free 3k guts, you can't go wrong with that. And I think this might be a little messed up to say, but because he's a 3-star and his stats are a little bit lower, if you bring him to a CQ, he's probably going to get 1 or 2 shot anyway. So you bring him in or you let him come in after one of your main supports go down, and he can bring you some pretty nice stuff. I mean, the guts and 50% NP gain ain't bad. Then we have, and I know this is going to rustle some jimmies, but once you see who's an A tier and S tier, it'll probably make a little bit more sense. Next, we have Helena, and I know Helena is a fan favorite, free-to-play, support type servant to bring, but honestly, with the quality of supports that we have in, say, A tier, I don't know if she quite makes the cut to be that high, because she does give the party 20% NP and an Omni card buff of 20% for 3 turns. For my newer players, if I use the term Omni card buff, it just means Buster, Arts, and Quick, which isn't that high, I suppose, but it's still kind of nice. It's just nice that you can kind of bring her to anybody. She has a self 50% NP damage buff for 1 turn and a 30% battery for herself. So with her first skill, functionally a 50% battery. That also lets her gen 5 stars for 5 turns. Not a whole lot, but it is on a 6-turn cooldown. So effectively, she's always providing 5 turns. There's only 1 turn where it's not up, which this can be kind of decent for clearing some waves in the same way to, say, Paracelsus. Battery's not as big, but she definitely does a little bit more damage with that 50% NP damage buff, and, can clear out some smaller enemies in a challenge quest, or you can use her as like a wave 1 clear if you do need just any other support that's in your box. Again, you're maybe in a bit more of a limited situation, but without the 50% NP damage buff that you have for 1 turn, her damage can be lackluster, although I could see the argument that you really only want her to clear 1 wave, or really want her to just clear out some mooks at the beginning of a CQ. I can kind of see that, but I think she still needs more. She has great potential in the fact that she gives NP, gives an Omni card buff, but maybe take it more in the direction of, say, someone like Ruler Da Vinci, who I think kind of does what Helena wants to be doing, just a lot better. Edison is another one of those servants that I think more so than Helena gets really downplayed, because I think a lot of people would probably either put him in C or D, but they've never read or used him before, because this guy gives some really good things. He's just missing out on, I would say, maybe 1 more buff, and then people would finally start bringing the Lion King over here to more fights. I mean, his first skill over here is giving an ally 30% defense for 3 turns, which makes them pretty decently tanky, and he's reducing their skill cooldown by 1, which is also very, very nice in just helping the uptime of certain skills or allowing you to loop certain skills. Then he gives the entire party 10% gauge and 20% NP damage for 5 turns, while also making 10 stars for those 5 turns. I know it has a long, cooldown, but it is a very powerful effect that really can help the party move more like a well-oiled machine, since they're getting free NP, free extra damage, and free stars. And then he can overcharge an ally's NP by 2 stages and also gives them a little bit of 30% star gen for 1 turn, which again isn't that crazy, but the 2 stages is ridiculous. I mean, that is a top tier ability that you see people like Himiko and Morgan having. That's really good. And then his NP is AoE, does literally no damage, but notably does seal all enemy skills and NPs, which again can be very useful. You know, you can time that to being a very effective defensive skill. You know, maybe they have one tick before they fire their NP and they have a battery skill. You don't want them to hit you with a surprise NP, seal their skills, right? Or they have their NP up, you use this to buy yourself a turn. Again, Edison has a lot of potential. I think he could be really good. We're just missing out on maybe like a buff or two for people to finally start using this guy. Next up, and let me remind you, this is not in any particular order, but it is Caskill. This is another one of those units very similar to Irisfield that after they got their buff, I definitely think it helped them out a lot, but might have been a little over-exaggerated. Again, B is not bad. That's like getting an 80 to an 89% on a test. You're pretty happy with that, but you think they could still do a little bit better. Mainly, I think they could do something with his charisma skill, maybe add a little bit extra on there. Maybe it's star refund per turn, maybe it's star and NP refund for the party, you know, who knows? Just something a little bit extra, because right now, he's on the right path. Giving the entire party 20% NP and then an extra 30% for himself does mean he has a 50% battery, which makes it a lot easier to get to his own NP, which has very, very powerful effects. But again, importantly, the main thing that everybody remembers Caskill for is 100% star gen for the entire party for 3 turns. That basically turns his NP into a star bomb when you're fighting 3 or more enemies, which is already nice because he's intended to be used with art servants who naturally should not be able to drop that many stars. So the fact that he's helping them drop more stars and can be a star bomb by himself is super nice. But on top of that, the NP gives the entire party 20% defense, so they're extra tanky, 30% crit damage, so they can make use of those stars that he's making, and those are on 3-turn cooldowns, which is super, super nice. But then, on top of all that, he's lowering their defense by 20% for 3 turns, so if he's the lead NP, everybody else is not only getting overcharged from him being the lead NP, but they're technically doing more damage because all their defenses got lowered. Plus, he's also giving that 21% attack buff, which I would like to see maybe extra stuff added to that, while also giving the entire party 30% arts and 30% debuff success rate for 3 turns. Again, guy has a lot of potential. I just want to see maybe one more solid buff. I'm not asking him to be competing with Castoria or Proto Merlin, but if he is a solid 4-star, you know, more on the low rarity side of things, A tier solid support, that's the most that I can ask for, especially for my boy Gilgamesh. Now, this next servant, I don't think anybody really knows exists, right? And I was kind of debating on whether or not I should drop him down to C tier, but his effects can be kind of good. And that's Kisuke, or Keisuke, whatever you say. I like Bleach, so I call him Kisuke as a nice little nod to Kisuke Urahara. But besides the point, he gives the entire party 20% attack, 20% NP gen for 3 turns, and splashes 10 stars. I'm not going to say he bombs stars, because 10 stars is a bit more of a splash. He gives himself the 30% arts and quick buff for 3 turns with a 20% battery, because, you know, he's also kind of meant to be a bit of a crit servant himself because of his own NP, which we'll get to, but you can also view it as, well, the arts and quick buff is technically buffing his own NP gain, so he can maybe get to his own NP faster, which is one of the better parts of him. His third skill is essentially Harp of Healing, giving the entire party 1 hit of dodge, a 3k heal, and it heals the damage over time debuff. So, you know, your poisons, your burns, your curses, all that nice stuff. But the NP is what I think kind of saves him a little bit. It made him a little bit more worth using, but not as niche as, say, Nobukatsu, but still a little bit more niche. So he gives everybody 20 to 40% attack depending on NP level, 10 stars for 3 turns, which I guess can kind of be nice with the 10 stars he splashed, you know, sure. And then everybody gets 10% battery. So a little bit of extra NP can be nice as, like, say, the Anchor NP, I suppose, but usually the Anchor NP is someone like a Castoria or a Merlin or a Tamamo, a Koyanskaya, someone that has a really good overcharge effect. You know, Koyanskaya gives the entire party NP, Castoria, Solemn Defense. You have Merlin giving extra stars even. So I don't know if you want him to be the Anchor, but if you're using him, your box is probably not the craziest stacked with all the meta guys, so maybe. But then he does really help out Shinsengumi guys by giving them 50% crit damage for 3 turns, which can be kind of nice for, say, like Saber Okita, Okita Alter, either the normal one or the summer one, Saito, Shinpachi, kind of as a little bit of a gimmick. And those servants in and of themselves aren't bad, which is why I kind of buffed him up a little bit to B tier, where I think really the only good servant you would want to use Nobukatsu with is Mao Nobu, as the OG Archer Nobu still kind of not there, can kind of still hit like a wet blanket, but again, is kind of getting there after they buffed her first skill. And then Summer Nobu is really only being brought to fight divinity people. So I don't know if she's really all that great, but you know, at least with Kisuke over here, you do have a nice smattering of options to bring alongside him, and he can really give them some nice buffs. So it's a bit more gimmicky, but I think he can slide into B tier. If I was doing this in order, he would probably be bordering that B and C tier, like right there. You know, kind of a little bit more dodgy. Next up is a servant that I really like using, but I kind of have to acknowledge is not quite A tier material, but I do really like her a lot. That is going to be Santa Martha. I do think she's really good, but I don't know if I can really let my bias let her slide up into A tier, especially considering how good the A tier supports are. But let's just give her dues, right? She does do some very good things, giving an ally 30% attack, 2k max HP, and a 20% battery. Those are all just very nice generic things. She can also seal all enemy NPs for a turn and lower their defense by 20% for 3 turns. So again, a little bit of survivability and extra damage for your main DPS. She does give Jalter level star weight for 1 turn, which is really insane, while also splashing 10 stars. So they're pretty much guaranteed to get those stars. Now, she does have a self 30% battery for easier access to her NP, but that NP is quick, which can be a little bit awkward. You know, usually you want to have your supports rocking an arts NP to make the arch chains a little bit easier and keep the NPs flowing. I mean, look at Scotty and Summer Scotty. I mean, those are quick supports, and they even have arts NPs to make it a bit easier. So the fact that they gave her a quick NP, I have no idea what they were cooking with that one. It's not too bad because she does still have 2 arts cards in her kit, but it's not super ideal. But at least the NP itself is pretty decent, you know, giving the entire party 20% attack, a demon, divinity, and undead power mod of 50% for 3 turns, and heals the party for 2k, while also splashing an additional 20 stars. So very, very strong support, but I'm not sure if I can quite put her in A tier, because while the effects are all pretty good, I think she'd be one of those guys that is bordering B, maybe could slide into A if you're having a better day for her, but I don't think, again, with the A tier servants I have, I don't know if she quite hits the level where I would put her up there, but she's definitely close. I mean, she's up there with another free-to-play servant that's going to be in B tier that I think could also maybe slide into A tier, but do just kind of find themselves with a bit of a niche. Now, Jean is another one that is kind of unfortunate because I really like Jean. You know, I'm a huge Jean sim. Many of you guys know this, but I can't put her in A tier because while her NP is really good and her skill buff was really good, she still basically has 2 skills that functionally do nothing, right? And unfortunately, while her NP is really good, it's just like worse Castoria NP at the end of the day. So I don't know, once they give her other 2 skills something, maybe then we can talk about her being an A tier at the very least. But right now, sure, she is a good tanky stall servant, right? She can stall for 300 turns, you know, she can arch chain, maybe even start just looping her NP, and she's infinitely immortal. But bro, that 5% defense on NP is just not it. You got to get her to NP5 to get what, 20-25% defense? That just ain't worth it, right? There are way better servants to chase at NP5 than just trying to get a crumb of decent defense that someone like Mash gives on a skill, or that Waver or Reigns gives just on a skill for free. So she is decent. I'll give her her dues for being in B tier for, again, having a worse Castoria NP, which is not bad. Being a worse Castoria NP, you're copying notes from the best, so that is a good person to copy from, but you're going to need a little bit more than that. There's also Nightingale, who I have been using more and more. I think I put her in C tier last year, but the more that I've been using her, the more that I kind of like using Nightingale, but it's kind of for a messed up reason. See, a lot of people would say, well, a Berserker support is really bad, but I would say, no, this makes her really good for coming in, dropping her 1st and 3rd skill, do not press the 2nd skill for the extra, you know, humanoid defense, and then just let her get washed. You know, she's kind of like technically a free plug suit without being a free plug suit, because she's going to go down in a couple of hits anyway. And if she happens to stick around for longer, then her NP will let you face take NPs, you know, cutting down attack and NP damage by 50%, debuff cleansing. It's really nuts. I mean, and then her 1st skill can be a little bit gimmicky as well, but at the very least, the fact that you're getting a heal out of it and you're getting debuff immunity is very decent. The insta-kill thing can be kind of decent. You know, there's like, say, a Lost Belt 7 fight that does have fairly prevalent insta-kill, I'll say, without spoiling who it is. So she's got some uses, you know, it's pretty decent. I mean, hey, at least her insta-kill immunity is on a skill. It's very easily accessible, unlike someone over here who locks it behind her NP that you never see. But You know, is she a little bit niche? Yeah, but that's why she's in B tier. You know, B tier is either just kind of like slightly worse than the A tier supports, or they're a bit more niche. But hey, I do think Nightingale does have a little bit of, you know, stuff going for her. You know, she's not all that bad. But then finally we have her Santa version. You know, even becoming a Santa could not quite save her from getting out of B tier. And this is our last B tier unit. Again, not in order, but I do think that while I did want to slide her into A tier, the fact is that she's kind of like either a better version of Ryder Martha, someone that you want to bring and just kind of use just for their skills alone, or she's like a really good plug suit. You have her at the very beginning and then you plug suit her out. Or she finds very specific niches, like say one of the raids during the Tugunska Sanctuary event, where you want to bring her specifically because of her first skill, you know, being able to not only remove the latest buff from the enemy, but more importantly, the latest debuff that you had, you know, something that you're usually starting the fight with, which is usually meant to slow you down at the beginning, but she has that on a skill, so you can just immediately remove that. And she does also give you some very nice buffs. Why I mentioned she can be a good plug suit option as well, because I mean, look at all the stuff that she's giving you. She has a 3k heal, she has a 3k gut she can give you with 100% buff removal resistance for 3 turns, which is insane, meaning any buffs that you give her or that you're going to be giving for your DPS servant and any other buffs that they get from your other supports, those are going to stick for 3 turns. And bosses are doing more buff removal to try to get around how insane our setups are getting, so this is still very good as a plug suit option. 30% NP damage is good for pretty much every single DPS servant except for people like Shishi Huang and Super Orion, but they are definitely the exception and not the rule. Then she also gives them 20% attack, 30% crit damage, and if you really want to, you can use her NP, which is an AoE quick NP, which can drop a couple of stars, which can be nice, but it also removes all enemy offensive buffs while curing their damage over time buffs, which is supposed to be a demerit, but unless you're specifically doing, I don't know, like the year 1 challenge quest with the crabs and you're trying to clear that with waiver with the curse damage, it's probably not going to come up, but removing their offensive buffs can be good. That's like Pierce Invul, attack buffs, you know, something like the Salieri fight that we just got on NA version over here for Lost Belt 1, where he gets up to 100% attack. She can just yeet all of that, which is very nice. And then it also lowers their defense by 10% for just a little bit extra damage that she's giving. So conclusion, very good plug suit servant, very good for certain niche scenarios, but I don't think I could quite put her up in A tier, although I'm very tempted to. It's just a couple of the servants that I have in A tier make it really, really hard for me to actually stick her up there. Starting off with our A tier, we're going to start off with the boy Asclepius. This guy, I think this is just how you do a healer completely right. For one, you could use him as a little bit of, say, a farming support, kind of like you would do, say, Paracelsus with his 30% party-wide NP gain and the 20% battery, but he also really shines when you start bringing him to more difficult content, because he's just an absolute boon to have, removing all of your debuffs, sealing the enemy's NP, giving one ally a fat 5k heal and a 50% debuff resistance, his NP giving everybody a 3k guts, an instance of debuff immunity, and a 1k heal for 3 turns. It's just pretty much like your Medea Lily. It's like your Iris Veil. You just smushed them together with a little bit of Paracelsus, so you can use him as a looping support. You can use him as a healer. If you need guts, he's got that. He removes debuffs. He's just exceptional. I think he is a healing support done completely right. I mean, the only other way to make them a little bit more broken is to make Proto Merlin or normal Merlin. Like, that's literally the only other way that they start to get a little bit more broken. Piggybacking off of Asclepius, there is Jufu. I think a lot of you should be very excited for the Arcweed banner because she's on there as a 3-star servant, meaning I know a lot of you guys are going to be pulling like madmen, so you should get her to NP5 real easy, and she is an absolute boon to every single box. I still break her out quite often on JP, even though I have Castoria, just because she's really fun to use. She heals the party for 2k, gives them 30% NP gain, cleanses their latest debuff, gives everybody a 20% arts buff, 30% crit damage, and a 30% undead power mod, all of those things for 3 turns, because, you know, why not? Why not just give them an undead power mod? Is it the best power mod ever? Not particularly, but think about it. If you're bringing her with Castoria for an arts team setup, because she does give you an arts buff, you know, it'll be nice, because she's giving a power mod that Castoria doesn't provide. You know, they're not stepping on each other's toes. Or maybe for some reason you want to bring her alongside Kolyanskaya, still not stepping on each other's toes. Very cool. Just a nice niche thing that probably nobody's gonna have, so if you do ever run into some weird skeletons, you can blow them up. She also reduces all enemies' crit chance by 20% for 3 turns to help you stay alive. She charges an ally's NP by 30% and gives them 1 turn of buff removal resistance, so if you're about to break that enemy's break bar and they're gonna yeet all of your buffs, Zhu Fu says, no, I'm not gonna let you do that. And then her NP, oh my goodness, her NP is so good. It gives you 20 stars for 5 turns, which is, again, why you probably want to bring her to arts teams, because arts generally is the one that struggles with making stars the most, but no longer, because Zhu Fu gives you 20 per turn for 5 turns. And then also just heals herself for 5k, which is really nice because she's a 3-star, so she doesn't have that much HP. This is pretty much like healing half of her HP, which is nice. And then gives everybody a 1k heal for 5 turns, which, again, very, very nice. If you bring her with Castoria, because maybe you don't have Proto Merlin or Merlin, she can kind of be that little sustainy guy that Merlin's supposed to be. Again, because her heal is also for 5 turns, so it's not too hard to stack 2 of them. And then, of course, if you bring a Consort Yu, she gets a bonus 20% battery and 30% NP damage, but Summer Yu's pretty good. Assassin Yu is okay, I guess, so yeah, it's a little niche that she has, but nobody cares about that, right? Nobody cares about that. She's just really, really good. So just acknowledging the fact that this is going to be a very strong servant we get, and she's definitely landing in A tier. The other A tier we have, and this might shock a few people, is Yui. I think Yui is very, very strong, but do I think she's S tier material? Looking at the guys that I have in S tier, probably not, but she is still a phenomenal support nonetheless. I mean, for one, she pretty much keeps herself safe. You don't have to worry about her because she has a Guts with a 1k heal for 5 turns on a 6-turn cooldown with an instance of debuff immunity to pretty much make sure you don't have to worry about her. She's gonna be fine. Then for the party, she gives everybody 20% NP, 30% NP damage, 15 stars, and reduces the enemy's attack by 20% for 3 turns. Again, very generic things that any party can use because she's supposed to be a very generic lower rarity support. She gives an ally a 30% arts buff and a crit damage buff for 3 turns, which, again, very nice. You could argue, well, maybe you're supposed to use her with art servants, but when we get to the NP, you'll see that's probably not the case. And speaking of her NP, she has an easy time getting to it, or easier, because she has a self 30% battery, which with the party-wide 20% battery means she technically has a 50% battery. Very, very strong. Again, one of the things that I complimented Caskill on. But then her NP, and this is why she might get really, really good depending on what other servants we get later on this year, it gives people buffs depending on what buffs they already have. So if an ally has a quick buff, they get 20% attack. If they have a buster buff, they get 20% NP damage. And if they're arts, they get 30% crit damage for 3 turns with an extra 3k heal for the entire party. Where this really starts to get really strong, because obviously they're always going to get the 30% crit damage buff because she can give them that arts buff. But this gets really strong for people like, say, Durga, Emiya, Muramasa, Baiken, all of those people. These guys that have these Omni card buffs can get really, really strong with Yui running around. And again, someone like Helena is a character that I'm kind of keeping my eye on, because if Helena starts to get more and more buffs, her and Yui could make a really devastating 1-2 punch, with Helena giving everybody every single card buff, and then Yui giving people even more buffs on her own NP that's already easy to access because of her own 50% battery technically, and then the 20% that someone like Helena would have. It might be a very strong 1-2 punch. I just, again, want to see Helena get like 1 or 2 more buffs, and then she's definitely going to be up there with Yui up there, and they'll be a very strong little duo you can make, especially with them both being 4 stars. Unfortunately, Yui is limited, so she's a little bit harder to get, but here's fingers crossed that she'll be on the next SR ticket, whenever that'll be. But again, she is very good. Next up, we have, I mean, do I even really need to talk about Chloe? I mean, Chloe is really, really insane. I know some people would consider her to be S tier because she lets you do all sorts of shenanigans, but again, I think she's like one of those niche units because you don't need to do all the setups that she does allow. Typically, doing your double Castoria, your triple Scotty system, your Koyanskaya Oberon, usually doing those are just going to be better anyway. But for one, a lot of these setups will require Chloe moving into the future, and she does allow a lot of really broken things. Again, I think the most funny thing that did come out was the ability to 3-turn farm with the Raj, because, well, getting into what she does, you know, she gives the entire party a 20% attack buff, 20% NP damage, and 20% crit damage. Generic good stuff. But, you know, she also gives a Guts. So someone like a Raj could actually, you know, keep living on his NP if you can give him enough ways to survive. She has 2 different on attack buffs, though, which is kind of interesting if you want to use her more as a DPS, because she's one of those supports that can pivot into doing that, where one, for her quick cards, they give her 10% crit damage for every attack that she does, which is kind of nice. I suppose she could be a little bit of a quick crit servant if you wanted to do that. The other is, again, kind of nice more for the support, that whenever she attacks up to 5 times, she gets these manuscript buffs that you can kind of cash in for on her third skill for 10% NP for the entire party per stack. So if you have 5 stacks, the whole party gets 50% NP, which is, again, really, really good. But again, remember that does require you to do up to 5 attacks. I do have a little bit of a slight gripe with her that she has a triple quick deck. I understand she's a quick servant, but it does make her a little bit more awkward to use. You guys have heard me talk about it more recently when I was doing the Salieri fight where I was trying to win with Melt Lilith. I put one of the runs that we lost where we were using her over on the Patreon, and in that run, I am kind of a little bit complaining about the fact that Melt only had 1 arts buff, and it slowly made things fall apart if you want to use this servant for an extended period of time. Now, if you're going to be beating a fight in, 3 to 5 to 7 turns, it's probably not going to be that big of a deal. It might cause some weird bumps in the road, but this really is only something if you need a very consistent party for like 20 turns or something like that, if you're really going to be in the boss fight for a long time. So something to consider. A little gripe I have against her, but not super huge, because again, Chloe's predominantly being used in these weird farming setups, right? I mean, again, I already mentioned that she gives you the guts, and then she moves herself to the last slot of the party after 1 turn. So again, so she kind of is an extra plug suit, in the same way that Miss Crane is, but her buffs, I guess, would be a little bit more generic, and that's why people seem to like her a bit more. And I guess Miss Crane does it on NP, whereas Chloe does it on a skill, which may seem a little bit more accessible, but we'll talk about Miss Crane when we get there. Spoiler alert, she's not an A tier. But yeah, then she also drains an NP gauge from the enemy, and then she stacks a 10% quick buff if you want to bring her, as a DPS, I suppose. And, if you do save the manuscript stacks, her NP will get stronger and stronger depending on how many stacks you have, but nobody's really doing that. I'm not meaning to actually sigh, but it's just who's bringing her as a DPS? Maybe the one guy who is a super Prisma Ilia fan is maybe bringing that. But let's be honest, we're all using it to do a bunch of dumb, really fun setups. But she lands an A because it's not like you need to have Summer Chloe. It's not like, oh my goodness, if you don't have her, you're going to absolutely just flop this year. But if you do get her summoning on the banner, you could do a lot of really fun stuff with her. And I think that really does land her up in A tier, because a lot of that stuff is very viable and can be very good. Now, finally, you have Nero Bride. Nero Bride is a really hard one to put in A tier, but the reason I kind of was able to rationalize why she could land up in A tier is because a lot of the people that are in S tier can actually be a servant that can hard carry you through content if you don't have the meta guys. They can be your hard carries, whereas Nero Bride is close in that the fact that she gives you 45% NP gain, a 30% battery, a fat 40% attack buff, Sky Power Mod, a decent heal, and can kind of be a decent DPS in her own right. But she's kind of like an addition to setups, right? I mean, originally, in say the first couple of years of the game, you could use her as just a dedicated double Nero Bride setup, but as nodes are starting to get a bit more weird and wonky, I think she's kind of lost the ability to do that, and you want to start bringing some of the more S tier supports, especially as fights get more complicated, nodes get more wonky. But it's not like she really lost her spot. You could still definitely use her as a plug suit into an arts team comp, or I mean, even you could use her in a quick team comp as well if you need the extra NP gain, the Sky Power Mod, and the attack buff. I mean, she does have a lot of her uses. I just think, not that she's fallen off, I'm not trying to say that, I just think the content really isn't what it was when she was kind of at her peak, if that makes sense. But again, still A tier. I mean, again, that's like getting a 90 to a 99% on your homework. I mean, that's really insane. But the other few guys, I really don't think we really got to talk about them very much. I mean, dude, Waver really kind of speaks for himself, being able to give 50% to one person, and the fact that the other members of the party get 20%. The buffs are super generic. It's just attack, defense, damage cut, crit damage. All that's really good. The NP is an AoE drain, potentially an AoE stun, drops curse, which can be useful again with that new power mod curse that we have. It's just a very nice E. Also providing a defense down. So if he's the first NP, he's not only overcharging the second guy's NP, but if the second one is an offensive NP, they're technically getting more damage on top of the overcharge. So again, very, very strong. Tamamo, I'm just never going to let Tamamo be slandered. Even before say Proto Merlin comes out, I've seen a lot of people say that, well, I still use Tamamo as my plug suit if I don't have Oberon, and that's completely viable. I mean, you can plug suit her in for extra damage, even for farming, because she gives you 30% NP damage and a 50% arts buff. But if you do want to bring her to more challenge quest oriented content, she's exceptional. I mean, lowering skill cooldown, her overcharge being an NP refund for the entire party means if you put her at the anchor, everybody's lost all their NP. She technically gets NP back because you use your NP gauge before you actually fire your NP. So she also refunds. So she'll end up having like 30-40% NP, even though she just fired it, right? It's insane. The fact that she gives you healings, not only on her NP, but on the skills, can kind of make up for one of Castoria's weak points, and that's sustainability. She does not really do well in these super long fights unless you're massively chaining and making the best use of your solemn defense. It's more of a war of attrition with Castoria because she doesn't have any heals natively without like command codes or anything, that she will just slowly lose health as the fight goes on. Tamamo can really help her out with that. Again, also draining the enemy NP gauge, keeping herself safe with a big thick defense buff for a turn that wears off a little bit, but is still a decent enough defense buff. She's really good. I'm not going to let the slander for Tamamo come out. Then there's Reigns. Range is probably a bit more of a defense-oriented waiver in the fact that instead of like crit damage, she gives you invincibility while still being able to give 50% to one ally and kind of basically having the same defensive skill that waiver has. She does give you a little bit of attack, which is kind of nice, I suppose, but I think her NP is really where things start to shine, and the fact that really if you want to bring her with Berserkers that are really some of the best guys to bring as DPSs, because you can bring them to any stage and they will always be super effective, except against foreigners, but that's one class out of like 13 that we have in the game. It's really strong, but everybody's super effective against them, but she can negate that and make them take neutral damage. It almost feels like cheating if you've ever used Reigns with Berserkers, because it's insane. I wish that she did the debuff cleanse on everybody, not just herself, but I guess it's kind of fine. She still lowers defense. It's a very strong, like she's a strong unit, like a very strong utility defensive servant, while kind of maybe not being as generic, I would say, as waiver, because people would probably prefer the attack, defense, and crit damage, and reducing enemy NP gauge and stunning them. She's still very good. Like, while I would say that I think waiver's a little bit better, I don't think they're that far apart. Then we have people like Merlin and Proto Merlin. I outlined both of them in the video I did like 2 days ago. They're both very good. I don't think Merlin has fallen off at all. I just think these guys are so insane. But even look at a lot of the recollection quests where a lot of people are bringing Merlin for those, and I don't think it's a mistake that the way that they released these quests is they put out the recollection quest and then a few days later Merlin's banner comes out for White Day. I think that is purposefully timed because it's really hard to get through those if you either are not super high NP leveled where you could just like 1 or 2 shot these guys, or if you don't have really good sustainability, it could be really rough. And Merlin's got all of that in spades, and so will Proto Merlin. I've already outlined why Proto Merlin does not actually power creep Merlin. It actually comes down to how the setups realistically work and function. You can look at both of their stats on the wiki and say, oh well, Proto Merlin skills are all a lot better, so she's way better than Merlin. But I outline in the video that when you actually go into these fights and you do these CQs, that's not how it works out at all. It's how you build the teams and how they function in a real setting versus just looking at the wiki page, which, I know is going to be very funny because I know some people are going to be like, but CTL, that's what you do when a new servant comes out. But that's why I always say when the info always first comes out, I say, hey, I think they're good, but let's use them in the game. This seems like it could be very obviously good, but we'll see. So, I think this is one of those instances where it would look like she's way better than Merlin, but they're kind of the same thing, just for Buster or for arts. Then we have Miss Crane. Miss Crane is nuts. Like, the more and more that I use Miss Crane, the more and more that I think she's insane. Again, I know Chloe does the same thing on a skill, but Miss Crane just can auto-fire her NP, get out of there, and then just dumps a whole smorgasbord of different things onto the field. I mean, we're talking attack, crit, NP damage, the whole 9 yards, anything you would want. Invincibility for your other people. It's just, she gives you a whole smorgasbord of buffs. And I know that it's going to probably take someone who just gets Miss Crane like 1 or 2 runs to fully figure out how she works. Believe me, I was there and trying to figure out like, okay, so does she exactly go to the middle back slot or the back slot? And does that bring in the 4th guy or the 5th guy? I was there trying to figure it out. But once you get in there and you figure out how it works, she's super strong. as just being a free plug suit that's not a free plug suit. The only thing that I don't like about Miss Crane is that she's a 5-star, so it's really hard to kind of fit her into teams with all these other giga insane 5-star supports up here because they all cost so much, especially if you want to give them CEs and stuff. But maybe they'll give us more team costs, you know, as the game goes on. Then there's Van Gogh. Van Gogh is a servant that as of late I have been absolutely loving. I mean, dog, you could use her as her own DPS, but just the NP alone, let me just read you the effects. It gives the entire party 50 to 100% crit damage, depending on NP level. But if you are just in existence outside the domain servant, which is not just foreigners, people like Renmaru, Summer BB, and Summer Okita also get this buff. It's not only going to be foreigners, so this will probably get better as time goes on. They get 100% crit damage for 3 turns, which is insane. That is Merlin and Proto Merlin's third skill that they were too scared to make it 3 turns. They only made it 1 turn. She just gives it to them for 3 turns. Or if you wail for Van Gogh, you also just get it for 3 turns. And then those guys get 200%, which is ludicrous. It's bonkers, right? It's so insane. But that's not all it does. It hits the enemy with terror, so you might just get a free stun. Nice, cool, based. And then she also just makes 10 stars for 3 turns. You gotta make sure you're doing those crits with that 200% crit damage you might be using, and then gives you just another 30 to 50% attack buff depending on your overcharge. And I bring up the overcharge because she has an arts NP, and you know, if you're doing fat arch chains, you can just stick her in the back and be like, all right, everybody's getting 50% attack now, you know, DPS Merlin, DPS Castoria, let's pick up our things and let's go beat everybody up, because she's also bringing survivability, party-wide evasion, that also, I guess, gives you 300 heals for 5 turns, which, sure, whatever. It's supposed to offset the curse damage, which, to be fair, curse is going to be very crazy. She does technically double lower the enemy's defense by doing 20% defense and 20% quick resist, which is why it's like, oh, you might want to use her with quick servants, but realistically, who cares? You can bring her with anybody. These effects are so nuts that just bring whoever you want, because she's also just giving them a 30% attack buff and some decent star weight for 3 turns, and just the ability to remove the latest curse buff that she gives them when attacking with your quick cards to get an additional 10% attack for 3 turns. And usually a servant's going to at least have 1 quick card, right? So anytime you find your quick card, especially once Mighty Chains come out, free, take it. 10% extra attack. Why not? Just take it. Just take all the attack buffs. I mean, we're already getting 30 to 50% on overcharge. We're already getting 30% for free. Might as well just start getting 10% more. God forbid you're Summer Chloe over here and you have 3 quick cards and I just quick chain. Here's an extra 30% attack. You know, just absolutely nuts what you could do with Van Gogh. Van Gogh is one of those servants that I used to kind of be a little bit more apprehensive on, but dog, she's crazy. She's absolutely insane. Now, I have Miyu on here because I was going to do a little section talking about her. Like, is she even a support? Because realistically, her NP is kind of like baby Merlin NP. I don't know if I really qualify her as really being a support. She can give you 30% battery, but you probably want to use it on Miyu herself because all of her other buffs are selfish. Like, the guts is for herself. The arts buff is for herself. She's probably more of like a Super Orion type servant that just kind of self-buffs themselves, and they are what I would consider a support, but shrug, I suppose. And then I guess I forgot to talk about Ruler Da Vinci, but Ruler Da Vinci I kind of just consider to be the better version, or what Helena could be, right? I think if they do start giving Helena buffs, they don't want to really, I guess, not have them compete, because Ruler Da Vinci's free, so people might always prefer using her. But I think she is one of the textbook examples for what a free-to-play, or just what a low-rarity good support should look like, because she just does a bunch of good things. She gives an ally a 20% Omni card buff for 3 turns, which, by the way, pretty good, because we just talked about Yui. She gives them that. Then she also gives them 20% NP and 30% NP gain for 3 turns. Pretty much everybody's going to like that. They're very generic. She gives the entire party 20% NP damage and 1 stage of overcharge. Again, just a bunch of very good generic effect. Reducing the enemy's crit chance by 20% for 3 turns, mean that you're not going to be dying as hard. She's a ruler, so she's kind of tanky and hard to take out. Her NP can be a little RNG, but all of the effects are good. Red Bullet's 20% attack for 3 turns. Blue Bullet is 20% battery for the party, and Green Bullet is 30 stars if she bombs. Like, everything she does is just really good. I think she is the token example of what a generic good free-to-play or just low rarity support could look like, because it's not like she breaks the game. You know, she came out and it's like, if you're a little bit more of a newer player, your box is less developed, she's super helpful. I remember breaking her out when she first came out to try to see how viable she was, and she's just really nice. Or when you're going into stuff like Grail Fronts or like the tower events, when your setups are a little bit more limited, you really start to see the value of this servant and how good she really can be. But yeah, that is going to be the tier list. I know people are going to disagree, as they usually do, but let's just keep it civil. You know, I think I outlined my points for this one. I did a little bit more research, and I've used all of these servants way more than I have some of the random assassins or random lances, because I did see some comments where people are like, ZTL hasn't used all of these units. I have used all of these units. It's just this is one of the ones that they're supports. These are the ones that I use the most and I test the most, because they're supports. They're the backbone of the entire game. So I think I outlined all my points very well. Again, none of these are in order except for this one. This is the only one that I think is in order, but everything else, it was just the order that I was adding them to the list, because some people like Van Gogh or Ruler Da Vinci I forgot to put on the list initially. Despite how much praise I have for both of them, I did kind of forget. Same thing for like Jean. I was like, oh yeah, I probably should add Jean as a defensive support. But let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Hope you enjoyed. Leave a like, subscribe if you made it this far, and I'll catch you guys on the flippity flop.